what are the other things that are in your way that could be an opportunity for something different, rather than looking at it as a negative. What could you learn from it, and how could you be different, and what's sort of presenting itself for you? And I think for me, mostly, that's what I did. I would look to people for inspiration, and look to the people that saw something in me and decided that, actually this person's worth the effort to actually pull out of wherever I was, heading in my life. Because ultimately I think it is about your own level of awareness of what triggers you, what supports you, what can drive you in a way. And that's sort of the greatest empowerment that you can give yourself, is that self-awareness and being able to look inwardly and see where's the strength that you need to pull. Because it was released around the time when I was in year 1, I think we went to see it. And that spoke to the dream, the creation, the dream, running something that you're passionate about, the good guy winning. And, because of his goodness and all these sort of other, it talked about all the horrible characteristics of the other kids that were, etc. So, and I was always, the good people should win, right? So, but it was also about creating that magic for people and creating that environment where the good guy could win.
Welcome to the Victory Lion Podcast. Lion!
Today is about the power of you. You will change the world.
And now your host,
O.P. Jayasinghe. Sonya, thank you for having a chat with me.
Thanks for asking.
No worries at all. Been too long.
It has been.
I didn't realize until you said 2 decades. It has been two decades.
2 decades, yeah. Yep. Lots of things passed by.
Exactly. And I love your house. Beautifully decorated.
Thank you.
Very, very nice. Classy and beautiful area as well.
Thank you very much. We work hard for it.
I can imagine.
As you do.
Going back.
Yes.
Way back.
Way
maybe not that way back, but tell me about your upbringing, childhood. And I don't know if you want to go back that far.
I actually thought about it because you did send that piece of information, because I was trying to figure out, because, in your life, and particularly when you get to my age, there's a lot of things that define who you are as you go through your life. And I thought I'll go back, because I think some of the things there's a cord that runs through the whole thing if you really kind of look at it. And I thought one of the huge life events, I think when I was little, and I was probably about 9 years old, I think it was about 9, and my mum was hit by a car on the way to work. So she used to catch the bus, and so it was out on the main road, and she was crossing to get into the bus, and whoever it was ran a light or whatever and hit her across the road. And I remember it because I remember her really being frightened by the cries that from her at the front of our home. So we were in bed when this happened, because it started early in the morning, and it was just terrifying. It's like this chilling, it's your mum, but you don't expect to hear that sort of pain in a person that you, especially when you're 9, that's your kind of whole world, your safety net, your everything. And I tried to check with her this morning. Actually, I called to try and figure it out, but she dragged herself away. The person drove off because they were afraid of what had happened. Yeah. So they drove off, and she dragged herself because it was only up the road. Well, it was a fair way, and particularly when you're injured, to drag yourself. So she came home, and then she'd broken her hip, and she'd put a crack through the hip, and there was her legs were broken. So she spent a bit of time in hospital, but came home pretty soon after that. But there was a lot of things that changed once that happened, and one of them was that she couldn't work for a while. She was used to working sort of similar times as my dad, and I think for her, agency, having her own income and contributing to the family was more than just being a mum. It was about providing as well.
Yeah.
And so she wasn't able to work. And then she was also cast in this sort of system of legal battles, So because she was hit not in a car by another car, there were different different requirements for her to prove a level of injury, to prove, that she wasn't able to work, and all this sort of, rigmarole. And that involved a lot of her going to appointments, lawyers, and meeting all these requirements. And
Is this in Australia?
in Australia, yeah, in Australia. So it really changed how it changed her as a person, because she was in pain, so chronic pain.
Chronic pain.
And because she was no longer financially independent, there was an impact in between her and Dad and the way they were together, because that sort of left all the financial responsibility with him.
Yeah.
But it also meant, because I was 9, right? And they were from Macedonia, so they migrated here just before I was born. So I was born in Australia.
Okay.
And so there's a little bit of I think trust issues when you first arrive here, and when you've been here even though they've been here for a while and been working, there's a bit of distrust around what's going on around you, particularly when you don't understand the language, right? So, and I was already at school. I think I was in year 3 or something when this happened. And so I understood and spoke English. So a lot of the medical interpretations were left with me. So I was being pulled out of school to go to doctor's appointments, and, sitting in doctor's offices for hours on end, in the public system, and having to interpret for her. But also, as a child, I didn't really want to be that obvious at school, but I was being pulled out of school during school hours, so that made me feel really vulnerable and visible, because I was being pulled out. But they weren't telling the school why I was being pulled out; they just pulled me out, right? So it was a different time, right?
Yeah, of course.
And
did you have any siblings?
I did. My brothers, but they were younger than me, so it was always, it kind of fell on me.
Yep.
And I had an aptitude for things, so they kind of thought, well, she's the smartest of the 3. The little one couldn't possibly have helped, but the middle brother was like, they left him and sort of relied on me more so, and it just meant that I grew up. I sort of became quite aware of injustice and systems and things that don't work, and I felt sorry for her, because she was actually quite injured, but she had to go and prove all these things over and over. So it made her quite an unhappy person, and just as it changed the dynamic. So I think for me that was hugely defining, because of the level of responsibility that was left with me as a child. It was also, that awareness about what it means, what systems can do to people, and the lack of, human connection that can occur because of that, and people sort of following rules and ticking off boxes. And that whole process took her a number of years before she eventually agreed to a payout, an out-of-court settlement, because of, pressures and really just wanting to get on with things. But it really did have a very different, we led a very different life after that, than as children, than we were sort of in this kind of very naive and innocent, which is what your kids should have. And I think particularly, well into, there's plenty of time to learn the truths of the world. You don't need to know that at that age. So I think that kind of put in my mind, at that time, I was like, I'm gonna make sure that whatever I do, things are going to be different for people. That somehow I'll have an impact in this world that's going to make a difference to the way people experience things, and whatever that looks like. I'm going to take on the world, and I'm going to fight those battles, and I'm going to win them, and that was kind of where I I started that sort of whole process of thinking about, well, how do I do things better? What's going to be better about the way that I do things? And how can I make other people's lives and experience better?
Did you feel like you had to grow up faster than you would have naturally? But you were the eldest anyway, right?
I was
So
the
there was
oldest.
a bit of
There's a little bit of
responsibility.
pressure because
Yeah.
because you do have that as
Yeah.
well. You do. You feel like I did feel like I was thrown into things that I didn't understand, and that I had to take on board and learn to deal with, whilst pretending to be,
Yeah.
unaffected.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
because and in a European family as well, and I know many other families as other migrants and other cultures, you're seen and not heard, right? So even if I'd complained about the fact that I was, a lot of it meant, me carrying very heavy shopping bags to go shopping because Mum couldn't carry these things, So you do deal with it, and you do silently deal with it. You do deal with it, and you start to sort of think about how to normalise it for yourself, and you don't, and then you stop thinking about it as being something separate to you or different, or you don't even realise that other people's lives are different. You just keep on dealing with whatever is in front of you as your reality, and you just move on with things, So that's kind of, it was a big event for us, and
Yeah.
and then, I think with, as I initially said, there's a whole, as things occur in your life and the new life experience and something else happens and something else happens, the only thing you can do is look at how you can cope and what sort of coping mechanisms you can put in place to be able to move on and keep on moving on in a positive way, to go forward. And to some degree, I think that is, that comes from some of the people you have around you as well. So you sort of look to, if I think about it, if you look to what inspires you, what do you aspire to, what are the other things that are in your way that could be an opportunity for something different, rather than looking at it as a negative. What could you learn from it, and how could you be different, and what sort of presenting itself for you. And I think for me, mostly, that's what I did. I would look to people for inspiration, and look to the people that saw something in me and decided that, actually this person's worth the effort to actually pull out of wherever I was, heading in my life. And teachers were really important to me at that time. Some of the great teachers that I had. Some of the bad teachers as well, was, it's always important to have that balance. And when you do, and you think, well, I really wouldn't, that's not the way to be, but you gravitate towards something. And yeah, I was fortunate to have some people that were around me, and I've always looked for those people to help to change or reframe what I'm experiencing in my life. So I think that's what I learned from that, and whether or not I consciously knew it, it was more about being hopeful and seeing a way to go forward. And that's kind of how I've run my life. No matter what's thrown in my direction, I always look at, what could I do differently, or how can I control this? What can I control out of this situation? Who can I turn to provide some sort of guidance if I need it? And because ultimately I think it is about your own level of awareness of what triggers you, what supports you, what can drive you in a way, and that's sort of the greatest empowerment that you can give yourself, is that self-awareness and being able to look inwardly and see where's the strength that you need to pull, what do you need to pull out, and so that's kind of that's something about the history.
Yeah. So that tragic event, didn't see it at the time, but that compounded, in your life to you becoming who you are. And it's a tragedy at that point in time, but you ended up, exercising your analytical skills, leadership skills, empathy, and all of those stuff
Yeah.
to your adulthood, right?
Yeah, yeah. So yeah, and I do think that there is, you know, you do have to have hope. You do have to feel that something's going to be different if you do things differently, and you have to. I do think education is massive in, you know, the opportunity to be educated, to read, and I was a bit of a dreamer. I would read a lot. You know, I loved the fairy tales, and I always believed in the fairy tales. Not that I believed that those are the things that would happen, but they were a sense of hope. You know, there was some sort of magic in imagining what was going on in these books and how you could draw from those stories to try and replicate that in your life, you know.
Yeah,
and so sometimes when it's, you know, things are really painful, that's the thing that you can go to. You can go to those deepest thoughts in your mind about how you could potentially see it differently and what you could imagine creating from whatever that situation is. So it is a mindset thing, I think, you know, that, and again, I mean, I say this now with my awareness and experience,
Yeah.
but I wouldn't have known it at the time.
At the time,
you know, at the time, it was just you're doing what you're doing. You normalise as much as possible. You're trying to sort of deal with whatever has been thrown at you, and you use whatever you can around you to try and, you know, move through it. And I think that's the case with anything that anything that anyone goes through.
Was there a book or two that sort of really played a part in your life growing up?
Oh well, there wasn't a book. There's a couple of things. I think in the first movie I saw when I was 5, when I was at school, and that sort of had I don't know why it was so significant, but for me, maybe not so much for other people, was Charlie and the Chocolate Factory.
Oh, yeah.
So
The original.
the original,
Yes.
because it was released around the time when I was in what, year 1, I think we went to
Yep.
see it, and that spoke to dream, you know, the dream, the,
Yeah.
you know, creation, the dream, running something that you're passionate about, you know, the good guy winning, and, you know, because of his goodness and all these sort of other, you know, it talked about all the horrible characteristics of the other kids that were,
yeah.
etc. So, and I was always, you know, the good people should win, right? So, but it was also about creating that magic for people and creating that environment where the good guy could win. So that was really instrumental in my sort of, I've always kind of wanted the chocolate factory. I wanted to run the chocolate factory or create the chocolate factory. So, and I tend to think in that's my creative space. You know, when I think about something that, you know, if someone presents an opportunity in front of me, I start dreaming about what it could be, how it could be, what would it take for it to be real, whatever that is.
Not in the current state, but what it could be.
What could be, yeah. So
Yeah.
if you've got a, you know, if that person is thinking about something, describes it, I'm like, oh yeah, I can see how this can work. And, you know, if we put this in place, this is how this will happen. So it's always been about that, you know, and I think whenever I've been given a team to lead, or, you know, people to lead, it's always about, well, what can we create? How can we be, you know, how can we stand out? How can we create something fantastic so that other people look at us and go, hey, look at you guys, how did you do that? You know, and I think that comes from really tapping into people and connecting with them, and you know, creating spaces where they can be themselves, because I think ultimately we all have our own individual story to contribute, and if you allow that to take place, I've seen lots of fabulous things happen in those creative spaces, you know. So I you know, bring on the creatives, I think.
How do you try and instill some of these lessons into the kids? Like, is that a different kettle of fish to the corporate world?
In my children?
Yeah, your own children?
Yeah, I think, I mean, I can't say I do it alone. So I've got my husband, who's a very pragmatic person, but he's also been brought up in an environment that encourages that discovery and self-discovery and positivity. For me, I see myself as being the person who has the cape, and if you ever need me, I'm here. I'm the superpower, and I will come to you and rescue you from whatever it is. You know that you've got my support, and I think that's for children. I think that's the main thing, is that they know unconditional love. That they know no matter what they get up to or what they think they've gotten away with, that there's someone there that has their back. And
But
I've
you
had
let
to
them experiment, and
and
then
you let them experiment, let them do their thing. You know, you raise them with qualities, value, self-worth. You know, there's a lot of, I mean, my daughter is probably the closest in terms of personality to me.
Okay.
She's quite intuitive and sensitive, but she's also got this pragmatism around her, and that comes from my husband, and you know, very, very practical in that way. And she takes things, and it's really about, you know, trusting them to grow into those qualities and providing an environment for them to be able to, you know, as you say, experiment and be true to themselves, and then know that, you know, you've still got the parachute. You can still pull the parachute back if you need to.
That's important.
And we've had to deal with things as you do with children as they're growing up. There's lots of things that go on at school and things that happen in their social worlds, etc., that they need to deal with. And you know, you can sometimes you're just the sounding board to hear, to let them you know, express those views. And I think to some, before I had children, I think my teams and my people were like my children, like my family, that I used to sort of, you know, they'd like come along and you'd save the
I
flock.
certainly felt that way, so I appreciate it.
So it was very much, you know, what can I do to look after them?
Course.
And because you do take that responsibility. So, and then when you have children, it's a different type of responsibility. But I think even to this day, if I am looking after people, I'm always looking at them from the perspective that I hold, and you know, I hold such a humble spot, because I'm able to influence how they experience where they are, you know, what their work life is, and their experience in, I mean, at the end of the day, you can't separate your home life from your work life to, you know, 100% of the time. So you can, you know, what do they say? Your workplace indicates how you know, how you feel on a Sunday night is indicative of what's going on for you on a Monday at work. You know, so you do have. If you can, you know, if you can provide or create an environment in which they feel safe, and which they feel valued, and which they are able to bring themselves, their full selves, to work, and that's a hugely humbling and honourable position to be in. And I think as leaders we need to understand that that's the level of responsibility. And there's the dog.
Is that right?
What is your problem? And accountability we have. So another, I don't know what's happening.
Something's going on.
Something's going on. But yeah, and I think, I mean, I used to have, you know, I ran a very large team at ANZ in the Talazales area, and I didn't have time to talk to people because I had so many people under my wings. But I used to keep a lolly jar next to my desk, and I kept it there because I wanted them to come and get something and sit down and talk to me. So when they came over, I sort of used it as a tactic to connect with them, because I was lonely as well, sitting behind the computers all the time and looking at what, you know, I needed to do and pulling figures up and, you know, stats and whatever else. And I was like, you know what, you actually need to come and talk to me. So here's a lolly jar, come and sit with me for a bit, and we'll talk while I do whatever I do. We'll connect, and then you can go back to your spot and, you know, and contribute to the team, feel like you've connected, and feel like you belong to something. So
that's a good tactic.
So it worked wonders, you know, because I was genuinely interested in having them sit with me. But
there needs to be that small reason, right?
Yeah, because they knew I was busy, and when they see I think, I mean, I've described it before. No one's going to describe me as a fun person, right? I don't walk in going, yay, you know, let's have fun. I'm quite serious about the work. So, and I'm sure when they see that you're quite focused, they don't want to interrupt because they don't want to break your thought, or they don't potentially think that you're not connect, you know, that you're not someone they can reach out to. But I thought, well, I am very focused. However, I really do want you to come and connect with me. And so that was sort of one of the things that I did to try and keep that communication going and keep them connected to me.
Yep.
And then there were other things that I did to connect them to each other because it was a very large team. So, I think at the end of the day, you do get these results that people just think, how did you do that? And it's like, well, valuing your people is where it's at.
Yeah.
If you don't value them, you're not going to achieve what you need to achieve. So, and I think, particularly if you want to achieve something that's extraordinary, not just something that's expected, then you really do need to tap into people's deepest motivation.
Yeah. And totally agreed. I mean, I know you said, we've only worked together for a very short period of time, but 2 decades on, I still remember how you made me feel.
Yeah.
I can't remember the specifics, but it was always a pleasant feeling. If I, like as you said, you're wearing a cape. If I needed Sonya was always there. Like that. Yeah. I felt that.
Yeah.
And obviously so did the rest of the team, which is good.
Yeah. Well, I'm humbled that you did feel that. I do remember us sitting there at some nights, and I do remember us having conversations that were, I don't remember the details of the conversations either, but I do remember feeling like we enjoyed the time.
We did.
Yeah.
It was a good time.
Yeah.
Definitely a good time in my life anyway. Where are you now?
Where am I now?
Where are you now in terms of life?
Yep. I have just gone out on my own in a business venture, which took me a while to get to build up the courage to be able to do it. I think people were trying to encourage me in this direction for quite a while. And I was like, no, am I ready? When will I be ready? I don't know if I'm ready. Is this my thing? But I think having been in corporates, I've also done a lot of voluntary work as well in the not-for-profit sector.
Okay.
So I did a lot of work in the education space and a lot of work in my boys were born prematurely, so they were born 3 months early. So I did a lot of time in the health space as well. So co-founded a support group for preemie parents.
Okay.
And then I went back into corporate and, being there, I think it was a safe option, sort of going back into what after being in not-for-profit for a while. And really I just so didn't fit. I just felt like, what am I doing here?
You didn't fit in the corporate world?
I didn't fit into the corporate world. I felt like I could do the work, but I couldn't do the politics and the cultures. I couldn't do the cultures. I felt that it was too structured in a way to permit that creativity and unless you go in at a very high level and you can influence the overarching agenda, it is very difficult to have any kind of influence in a big corporate.
Yeah.
And
in terms of culture,
So you kind of deal with what you have in front of you. And being that I'd been in sort of much more creative spaces and done some bigger things, it was really hard to adjust to a limited scope.
Okay.
So I thought, well, this really doesn't work for me in the long term. So what do I do with myself when I really do feel that I have so much more to contribute?
And you feel like your hands were tied behind your back.
And you when you go into these environments, it's I It's a system. It's a systemic thing. It's something that works for them, and it works to because they're very large and they have loads of different. Every business unit is working quite siloed in these organisations for good reason, because they need to manage that particular area of the business. So they do have requirements around that, right? So it becomes. I don't know if they, I don't know if they want to tie your hands. I think it's more just a nature of the way that things operate in a very big organisation. By the time, the tail end receives the message from the head, the head has already moved, right? So it becomes quite difficult to make those changes and or to attribute sort of a great, to make that sort of impact, to have that sort of impact in those places. Again, unless you're in sort of very senior roles in there.
Mm-hmm. Did you feel this only after working in the voluntary space, or have you always sort of felt this?
I don't think I was aware how little I fit in. I felt like, because I understood the systems, I think I tried to, I think I've spoken about it in an earlier part of the interview, normalising it. There was a lot of normalising of what was going around even though it didn't feel quite right, I felt like I was trying to adjust to it, right? So fix myself.
Yeah.
Like, there's something wrong with you because you're just not working in, in a way that's sort of making sense in this environment.
Yeah.
You do get the systems, you understand how to work the work, you can see how it could be different and all that sort of thing. But something's wrong with you. So just fix it. Yep. and when you fix it, it'll all work out differently, etc. And I think it took for me to leave, be in different environments, have more freedom to make decisions and create in a different space, that I realised actually no, it's just that's a system, and that system doesn't work with that level of creativity. Mm-hmm. So you're asking for something to occur, and I could make it happen in discrete pieces of work, or when I worked on in our direct sales environment, I could make it work there. But when I worked in a different team, if the team was about something else, it was very difficult to make that sort of change.
So it's very siloed.
It's very siloed. So it's very difficult to do across the board. So, and there's nothing, not being critical of it all, but there's nothing. It's not right or wrong. It's just the way it is, and it's really about what do you want to achieve in your life and how do you want to do that. So I thought, well, but my experience is when you're an outsider, it's a little bit easier to make those changes, because by the time they come to someone who's on the outside, they're interested in real transformation. So it really is about, well, what do you have that we can, what can we really do want your contribution. We really do want you to help us with this sort of change, because we see a problem. Whereas if you're trying to push to someone, you've got a problem. If they can't see the problem, then it's actually not their problem. It's yours, right? So I really do go back to this whole idea of, changing, Willy Wonka and that dream, and bringing visions to life. And I've seen some businesses that have, been able to do that, and it's really inspiring. So you think, well, what can I do, and how can I contribute in that world, and how can I develop leaders that can go into these different spaces and be able to break down some of these systems. It might not happen whilst I'm working in this environment, but if it's something that future leaders can do, and break down some of those silos and break down some of those systems, because at the end of the day, systems are created by people. Mm-hmm. If you change people, then you change systems. And I don't mean change people as in get rid of them. Yeah. I mean, change people, transform the way that they think about things. I actually read some I've read Brené Brown and Adam Grant and all the leadership thought leaders. And I read something recently by someone that I'm working with, and they talk about that next level of transformational leadership. Beyond servant leadership is this whole idea of where that connectedness of people and bringing people together. And when you read that sort of thing, and I think it's a Swedish-based organisation, and you think, I think I know leadership, but I've still got some growth for myself internally. But but I'm willing to go there. I'm willing to learn this stuff because I do think that it does transform lives. And there is a lot of things that in our systems are not working well. And not working well for people. Our legal system and our corporate system and our political system have all got these. Ultimately we're about people, at the end of the day. So it's really imperative that we start to think about that, and connect with each other. Maybe it's an old person's view. I don't know.
No, I get what you're saying. Can the culture flow though with the servant leadership? Like, do you know what I mean? So if you're higher up on the top and you're not a servant leader, you're basically, lack of a better word, dictator, and you're sort of giving the rules as it cascades down.
Yeah.
As opposed to a servant leader who's working and bouncing back ideas. Can that flow through?
You mean go up and then flow
Correct.
down?
Yes. Up and back.
Up and back down. There has to be a motivation, I think, to drive that message up, right? So we collectively, because power of the people, right, is I suppose it's a bit of a dream, right? Power of the people, but ultimately, you have to be, people at the top need to be motivated to be able to move things or to shift the dial, or in the direction of servant leadership.
Yeah.
If they're not motivated to do it, if they can't see the benefit, then it does become very difficult. And I think that's one of the things that you're always going to come against, because those who are necessarily in power aren't necessarily empowering. They might be people who are disempowering. But and I think as an individual, you have to make those changes where you are and attract that change as far and wide as you can within your level or your circle of influence.
Got it.
And see, it's going to take a long time to actually move that dial. It just depends on how as human beings how connected we are, how self-aware we are about our motivations. And it's easier sometimes, I think, in the short term, to put your head in the sand and not take that responsibility, and that happens, and that's a human response to change, fear of change, or what could it mean, or how could that happen. And I was recently reminded of an author that I read 3 decades ago now, Marianne Williamson, and in thinking about that, and that motivation to or stepping into that fear, right? So Marianne Williamson, I'm not sure if you're familiar.
The senator?
No, she was. Yes, she was. She was a senator. That's right. Yes. So she was. She wrote A Return to Love, which was a book based on the Course in Miracles.
Okay, no.
So so this was back in the day. She did a lot of tapes at the time.
Okay.
That's how long ago it was.
I've listened to tapes. So
yes. And she talked about the Course in Miracles is a God-based book.
Okay.
Right. So and it's 12. I think, I don't know how long it is, but it's a long thing that she interpreted, and she talked about. All emotions boil down to two things. They're either based in love, or they're based in fear. But if you really take it to the ultimate level, they all are based on love.
Love.
Right, so ultimately they all go back to love, because fear isn't real. Ultimately, if you're in your truth, fear is not real. It's all about love, but she uses God in her
As a central
writing,
piece.
in the central theme,
Okay.
and going back to sort of some of the stuff that, you know, over your life journey, I kind of, very young, I sort of went, no, I really don't want to, you know, I think God, I kind of rejected God in a way, I guess in what I saw of, you know, the churches and whatever else. I just thought, you know, this isn't really, can't be God. And I found it very difficult to read this book. I was reading it because I was going through a tough time at the time, and I was trying to work my way through.
Yeah.
And I knew that blaming others or whatever wasn't getting me anywhere. So I was like, okay, I need to sort of look inwards and figure out what's going on. And I found it very difficult to read because she referenced God all the time, right? So she says in the book, change the word. If you're feeling uncomfortable about the word, change the word, whatever that means for you, to whatever, love, whatever you want to change it to. Change it to that if it's going to help you read the book, and if it's going to help you to take on some of the messaging. And I did. I had to change the word. So every time she said God, I changed it to love, and you know. So it was always. So it was easier for me to digest the information, and I wasn't. I don't think I was a master of it. You know, I read it and I underlined it, and different parts resonated with me, etc. But I thought, you know what, I'll take as much as I can. So the rest of it, if I can't understand it, well, so be it, you know, another time it'll come to me. So I guess going back to what I was initially saying is, in the people who are afraid of this change, or as human beings, we're afraid of that next level of development, it's really just get comfortable with it. Just get comfortable with the fear, get comfortable with as much as you can, take on as much as you can, and then just be willing to take it on. And then once you've taken on that little bit, you might take a little bit more on. It might take you a while to do that, but you'll eventually get there, as long as you're willing to stand in that fear.
Yeah.
And that for me is really, you know, I guess a sort of the inspiration behind why I then went, okay, well, I'm afraid to start my own business, but I think I have a purpose here, and I know what I deliver, and I know how I work, and I know what the benefit is, and I know why I need to be here. So just stand in it and get used to that.
Get used to it. Yeah.
And then, you know that once you're in there, things will start to open up, and you'll start to get comfortable, and you'll start to, you know, you'll remind yourself of why you're doing it, and you'll remind yourself, you know, every time I speak to a client, when I walk away from it and I know they've taken something from what I've said and it's really been valuable to them, I think, well, if I don't do this, I'm actually denying other people of, you know, knowledge that they need in order to create whatever they need to create for themselves in their work life, or in their, you know, in their business, with their people. And, you know, it's not something you should stow away. So that's kind of where it comes from, and where the motivation comes from.
I love that. And you're absolutely right. People just naturally have a tendency to think all or nothing. It doesn't have to be like that. You can, you know, eat the pie one bite at a time, right? Slowly get comfortable. A crumb.
Crumb is good.
Exactly. Yeah. It just doesn't have to be all or nothing.
Yeah.
It's, you know, people will say, you know, I can't, you know, eat a good clean meal because I love cheese too much, or whatever, right? Well, okay, then eat the cheese, but also have some good food, whatever. Like, it's all that mentality.
Yeah.
In terms of sort of the business that you've started, could you go into it a little bit more? What type of services, what are you offering to clients?
Yeah. So there's so the service is transformational leadership.
Okay.
Ultimately, it's about transforming people and systems and processes, but mostly about creating that environments in which you can create those transformational events in a business to create the business outcomes that the founders or CEO or the team, the board wants.
Okay.
So there's three ways to tap into it from our service proposition, and the first one is interim leadership, and interim leadership is stepping in to a leadership role within the business as a temporary role, and it could be to replace a leader that's left. It could be because they don't know what leadership capabilities they need.
Maternity leave?
Yeah, maternal leave probably not so much.
Okay.
It's more around the sort of the executive level of leadership, and looking at. It could be because they've restructured and they really don't know what they need, what kind of leadership structures they need in the business in order to move it forward in a particular direction. It could also be a situation where they want to move into a particular way of doing things, but they don't know. They don't know what that looks like yet, and so they're looking for someone to come in and do this a piece for them that's an analytical piece, but it also is a piece where it allows them to look at their own capabilities and work out, well, how do we do this?
Okay.
That's one way. The other way is the leadership development program.
Sorry, before we get into that,
Yep.
the first bit, what would that entail? Like, would you go into an organization, run workshops, or meet with the execs and board and so forth? Is that type of approach?
It would be appointed by the executive team, so CEO predominantly, because I think at the level that we're operating, it would be the decision makers.
Okay.
And you would do an analysis of what their business is currently doing. So, and then you would run workshops depending on what they need, or in the interim leadership space, you might actually run the business for a while for them. So you would actually go in, do the leadership role that if they were missing a key executive, you'd do that role. If they were looking at a piece around investigating what's needed, then you would do an analysis of their structures and their processes and work out where the gaps are and put that stuff together, and then transition them across to it. So it's really not so much a workshop space, it's more an in-action leadership space. Okay. So the leadership development piece, that's where you would be doing workshops and training and upskilling their leaders.
Okay. In terms of doing, I guess, a gap analysis, I mean, they would know where they are in terms of currently where they are. Who defines where they should be, or the ideal future state? Is that something that you would provide, or is that something that you would pull from them? Or influence?
It's really about pulling it from them, because at the end of the day, they're more likely to buy in to it if it's coming from them. But it's also about a realization from them about their own abilities and their own. It really is about tapping into their frame of reference and their lived experience, and everyone has value. So how I see a future for their business wouldn't necessarily fit with what they have have imagined or what they've lived, and if they can't relate to it, then it's really hard for them to accept moving into a new way of working. And I think most of us, if we go back to the self-awareness piece, we know what we need to do. We just not necessarily consciously aware of it, and sometimes you just need a little bit of help to actually bring that out into the forefront.
My concern, or I guess thing, would be if they don't know, like if they're sort of stuck in a rut of acting in the same old, and you can clearly see they're just going down the same path. How would that interaction play out?
Okay, so that's the influencing piece.
Oh, is that
right?
okay? I'll let you continue to the second bit then.
Yeah. So this is the thing. If they are struggling to come up with what that would look like,
Yeah.
then that would be where we would look at. Well, I would say here is what works. Here's
Yeah.
what I can see is happening, and get them. I mean, I've done a lot of influencing in my time and a lot of bringing people on board for a journey. So that part of it is very. It's a challenging piece because you do have to break down some of those thought processes. But at the end of the day, it is something that we would do. You're more acting in the more traditional forms of consulting. I think when you do that, where where they're asking you, can you solve this for me? Rather than can we solve this together? And I think that. Not my thing, I think, but in my experience, solving it together is a much more effective way of making it stick.
Okay.
And I think, again, in my experience, when you bring out clarity and allow them to see what's going on, that they have forgotten potentially in their business and the way they run their business, because they get stuck in doing the everyday of the business cycle. When they step away from it, that clarity becomes a little easier to make visible.
Okay.
So whereas I think if having been around consultants who come in and tell people how to do things, they tend to go back to where they were when
Absolutely.
the consultant leaves, So
Absolutely.
it isn't really, transformation really requires an internal change.
Yeah.
And the type of transformation I'm talking about. But you can do transformative pieces of work that don't necessarily change the way people operate. But if you really do want to bring the passion side of it from of the business owner into the business and into the leadership realm, then you really do need to tap into their thinking and how they operate.
Okay. So these are individual approaches, right? Depending on the business needs and the executive needs, right? So you told me about
So
two of them.
there's three different approaches.
Yep.
One of them is around CEO coaching.
Okay.
So that is really a sounding board for the CEO to tap into their own frame of reference
Got it.
and work through the challenges that they face, and also looking for sort of what works for them in terms of resolving those challenges. So that's another program, and that could be isolated from the other three. I think depending on the size of the leadership team, you tend to go with the programs around the CEO and the leadership development together.
Okay.
So it would be just for more as a more impactful program, but yeah. So the interim one is quite a different piece, because ultimately what we want to do is want to leave the business in a way that they are running it without you being necessary. So you walk in and you go, well, this is what we need to do,
Yeah.
and we do that piece of work, and it's quite you walk away transitioning it to their operating for themselves to do once you leave. But
So you implement the systems and the processes, and empower them to run it, basically.
correct. You teach, the way we describe it is teaching them how to fish. So you don't. You never. I mean, none of what we do is intended to be permanent. It is meant to be transformational, but it's not meant to be that we become, a permanent member of your team.
Yeah, of course.
So, because ultimately we want businesses to run independent of what the services that we offer, but it's really about opening up an awareness around what they need to do for their business.
Okay, awesome. What was the last approach? Did we stop short of
Around
one?
the CEO?
Yeah.
Or there was the leadership.
No, I think the leadership one.
development.
Leadership one.
Yeah. So leadership development, we're working with, and these are the skills that it's not a transactional approach. It's a transformational approach. So we'll customise a program to their leadership team depending on where the issues or they see the challenges are in the team. So. So it'll be, it could be communication, it could be around strategic thinking. I'm working with someone at the moment who's dealing with upskilling their team who weren't necessarily in leadership roles previously, but they're growing and they need to upskill their teams in certain areas, and one of them is strategic business thinking. So it's running individual sessions where we need to, but also workshops for the team to understand the direction of the business and where it's going and what their role is within the business of getting it to where it needs to be.
What level are we talking about, Sonya? Like in terms of like
The leadership level,
yeah.
So the executive leadership team is really the target of the courses, depending on the business. So if we're talking about a very small business, you might be dealing with the founder and their direct reports. And then if it's a bigger business, it will be their executive team.
Okay.
Yeah.
And in terms of sector, doesn't matter, or is...
There isn't. I have. So I'm working with some interesting sectors at the moment. So not necessarily specific to a sector. I have come from banking and finance and service sectors. So I've got a very good understanding of them. But at the end of the day, it really is about the leadership capability and not necessarily about the area of business that they're in, because at the end of the day, that's something that cuts across different industries.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Doesn't matter if they're selling potatoes. The success principles can be applied, right?
Correct.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah.
Amazing.
Yeah.
Can you just summarize, if I got this correctly, that 3 approaches plus the CEO support?
So there's 3 in total.
Okay, 3 in total.
Sorry. So there's the interim leadership piece, which is us stepping in temporarily. There's the leadership development program.
Yep.
And then there's the CEO
Got it.
program.
Okay.
So there's the 3 of them.
Okay, excellent. And depending on the business, you have an initial consultation, I'm assuming, with them?
Discovery call.
Discovery call.
And then we potentially go into a little bit of, we'll go and visit the business and spend some time with the team. So depending on how big the team is, we talk to the CEO first, and then we'll talk to the different parts of their business. So that could take, that'll take a while depending on how big the business is. So we could be in there for half a day and talking to the different people to figure out what their perspective is on what's going on in the business.
Okay, amazing. And in terms of sizes, you said it doesn't really matter, right? I mean, is there a
lower limit?
Yeah, that's what I was going to ask. There's no...
A lower limit? There isn't a lower limit. I think it depends on the stage of growth that they're in. Ideally, you'd want them to be at least 20 people in the team, as in the organisation, so that they actually do have some structures in place around leadership, and or it's around the dollar value of the business. So they might have a small business, but if they've got some executive level leaders that are running sort of large profit centres within the business, then it can be a smaller business. So and it's really around dealing with. So I can do solopreneurs as well, but that would be more around the CEO coaching piece, because there isn't a leadership team per se to deal with. but of course that all helps because depending on what they're planning on doing or targeting in terms of their business growth. And I am working with someone at the moment who's a family business, but they're growing. So they're looking at what do they need in terms of their leadership and what do they need to build up in terms of their structure to be able to cope with doubling the business size.
Okay.
Both in facility and people involved, without sort of losing what they're doing at the individual level at the moment. So that's so again, it really is around where are they sitting in terms of their journey and working with them at that point in time. So that's where we're targeting at the moment.
Makes sense. You mentioned the word courses a couple of times.
Yep.
Can you elaborate on how they're run? They're not sort of...
They're not online.
Yeah, that's...
They're not online. So they're run through workshops.
Okay.
And they will be based on, we might be dealing with, for as an example, communication strategy or communication skilling. So we will look at what do they need, what does communication mean for them, and then design what they need to have as a framework. But it will really be about what is it that if for example it is a communication thing and they feel that they are communicating the way they should, and then it's really about, well, who's the recipient of the message and what messages are they getting. So it'll be a piece around understanding what their customers are thinking and what their staff are thinking, and the people that touch their customers, what are they thinking. So there'll be a piece around figuring out, well, where do you sit at the moment in terms of your communication? What does that look like for your business? And then working through building something that fits, that's customised to them around upskilling them in that space. So it could be a matter of channels, or it could be the style of communication. It could be so there's all different aspects of it which we would look at and say, well, okay, what's not working for you, and how could this be done better?
Okay, amazing. Your competitors, like, how do you set yourself apart from your competitors? Without name, I mean, if you want to name names, you can, but you don't have to.
No, I'm not going to name names. There's many consultants out there. I haven't looked at, I think I know a few names. I do know a few names. And for me, it's around what my experience is in the business world. I do have a corporate background. So even if I'm, even though I may, I'm not dealing in a corporate space, I can translate the things that I know and transfer them across to a smaller business.
Yep.
And in fact, you get that sort of knowledge that you wouldn't necessarily have, and that exposure in a medium-sized business that corporates, get access to a lot more frequently. In terms of our interim leadership, it means you do get executive level experience within your business if you don't necessarily have that skill within your business, and so that's part of the benefit. The other part of the benefit is that the way I describe it is, I walk into a business and I can start putting the dots together and figuring out how to make that, whatever it is they imagined, come to life. So it's really about how do I lead them through that process to be able to connect those dots and be able to bring that vision to life. So, and aside from which, it's also the fact that I do connect on a very real level with people. I'm very personable, and I know lots of people. The consultants, obviously, you have to trust the people that you deal with. But I do have a broad range of experience to draw on, and a broad range of success of making things that people didn't imagine could happen come to life. So, and And at the end of the day, I'm about what happens on their financial side, what happens in their the results that they achieve in their business. So, if it's not about those results, then at the end of the day,
You feel like you're not adding any value.
I haven't added the value.
Yeah.
I could make the team work as functionally as possible, but if it doesn't result in growth and if it doesn't result in their profitability, then we haven't really achieved anything. And I think that going back to what I was saying a little earlier, people can see me as being quite serious because I'm very focused on what the results are. But at the end of the day, I know that the way that we get there is by making sure that everybody is working in unison towards that result in a way that they feel that they're contributing.
I know it's sort of fairly earlier on in this venture, but do you see yourself doing sort of a baseline analysis and then, post-implementation, 12 months, 3 years, 5 years down the track, seeing what happened? Would you see that?
Yeah, I do. I do. You do want to see what happened to your babies.
Yeah. Okay.
So you do. I think one of the other things that separates us from other people is we really are very much about the accountability side of things, and what I mean by that is not that people aren't accountable, but we really do want to be sure that we are tracking what's happening and that we can put our hearts on hand on heart and say, we actually helped someone to create something meaningful that they imagined for themselves. So we do and will run a check-in on the process for them.
Amazing.
So it is early days at the moment, but that's one of the things that we intend on building in our process, to be able to go back and say, okay, well, how did we track on this?
Okay, that's awesome, actually, because I'm sure the clients will value that as well. They love me. They want to check in on how things are progressing.
I think it's a really good question, a really good point, because how do you track that you've done something meaningful? If you've walked away from a situation and without sort of checking back in, so you wouldn't know whether someone. I mean, you could probably see them in the news if they're going well, getting the sun now.
It's a bit bright, isn't it?
It is a bit bright,
but
yeah. So yes.
Okay. Okay. Amazing. I think we've covered a lot of topics. Is there anything that we've missed, do you think, that you wanted to touch on?
I think we've covered quite a bit, actually.
Yeah.
But I think, I guess at the end of the day, the only thing I would reiterate is really transformation is very much about self-awareness and the work that you do. And, the greatest gift any leader can give to their team is self-awareness. That is themselves and the awareness that they can create in others and the way that they, how they contribute and what they contribute to what the ultimate purpose or vision is.
Yeah, amazing. I love that. How can people get in touch with you? I'll put everything in the show notes anyway, but just off the top of your head.
Off the top,
if you have a place that people can go to visit.
They can get in touch with us on, the best way to get in touch with us is on the website eoxbusinesspartners.com.
Can you spell that?
Or eoxbusinesspartners.com. And or they can follow me on LinkedIn and or EOX Business Partners on LinkedIn, or wherever they get their social nutrition.
Okay.
Or otherwise.
Yeah. Thank you. I'll make sure that's all there. Anything else?
No, that's it, I think, from me.
Beautiful. Thank you very much for your time. Until next time.
Until next time.
Thanks, Sonya.
Hopefully not 2 more decades.
Yeah, I know.